I don't know if you guys want the information after or whatever, because I do IT and I just write on the side and work with my friends to do more. But I built a PowerPoint presentation to bring awareness to them, and I really believe what you guys are doing because they come from Ghana and Africa, and just hearing her story, and it just kind of ties into what you guys are saying, so I can give that to you after.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool.
Yeah,
Thank
cool.
you.
Yeah, if anybody knows anybody, we're always looking for immigrants, immigration experiences, historians, local people, anybody who's great at talking, who you would want to hear more from. Always looking for people like that. Yeah, this is good.
So the music guy. So I'm a journalist background. So when I'm writing this play, I didn't know plays had beats. Had no clue about that. What are your thoughts about that?
So like radio plays.
You write the script
Uh-huh.
and the dialogue, it has beats.
Are you talking about like musical beats or like pauses and beats?
No,
Like
it's
a rhythm?
dialogue beat, I don't know how.
Yeah,
it is.
yeah. We talk about beats a lot, and
Yeah.
that comes into play a lot when you're editing, especially if you're editing together a sentence that maybe someone didn't say. They said 5 things in between, but you're trying to make it sound natural. So a lot of times we'll sit there and rerun the same clip 10 times in a row until it sounds like somebody actually said it to you, and that oftentimes it's like if you were saying that in one sentence, you would pause there.
Yeah.
And pauses, they add drama to. But yeah, making things sound natural and then making things sound more compelling can often just be like how you space them,
Yeah.
and it just takes repetition, listening.
Yeah, where you end a clip too, because a lot of times they'll say something awesome, but then they'll just keep talking for a long time.
And that ruins it.
It ruins it. So you gotta cut that off.
Yeah, I think my instinct in the beginning, probably because I worked in the news, is to make everything as fast as possible. So my first edit is like getting rid of all the junk, you know?
Yeah.
And then when I listen through, and then I realized, okay, there's some points that need to slow down now. You know, there's some points where like we just need, and I think when I email Tom to say like, oh, can you help me fix this? I'll be like, this needs 2 beats, this needs 1 beat. Like we need just like a second of nothing for emphasis. Or Trisha Rose, the hip hop expert, she is brilliant, but listening back to it, she kind of just goes from one topic to another without taking a breath. And so she was saying these brilliant things, but then they were getting lost because they were just running into the next thing. So I had to take the few silences that were in the interview and insert them in between sort of her thoughts to really give them the emphasis that they needed and the space they needed so you could process the first thought and then move on to the next one. And for music too, sometimes the best thing you can do to emphasize something is to take away the music. So if there's something that's really important and you've got some music going on, when the music drops, that's also a signal to listen to. So yeah, working with silence and noise.
So when you're working together, how do you mark what you want him to do, and then how does that work? You sometimes come back to her and say, I think this would be better after she's.
Sometimes I just make a change.
I don't even notice. That sounds good.
But yeah, no, Megan usually will lay out for me, as you're doing this pass, can you pay attention to this,
With timestamps.
Change this, what do you think about this? And this will just, we probably should use Google Docs, but.
So it depends on the work that we're doing. So our first project together was for Possibly, which has evolved over time, but originally they were sort of 30-minute, like long pieces about sort of making these environmental questions personal and applicable. And so for those, I did most of the initial mixing, and then it was for him to sort of clean it up. And he would do an initial clean, and then I would just come to his house, and we'd work for like 3 hours, like side by side, and we'd play things together, and I'd say, oh, let's try the music there, so that was really just next to each other working. And then for the other ones where it's just editing down an interview, I'll do the first, you'll process. Tom will record the sound, do those initial like declicking basic things for the whole file. I cut it for content, and then he then it goes back to him to do a final polish.
And we just basically work from the same file in a Dropbox folder, and we have the same program, and, you know, either she's editing it or I am, usually not both at the same time.
Yeah, and we just go back and forth until we're happy with it.
How do you market your podcast shows?
We were just
Yeah.
talking about that.
It's hard. We have the station doing it for us, but it's, you know, it's still like I think word of mouth is first and foremost what you want. Like telling everybody and their mother to tell everybody and their brother about it is great. Using your own personal social media is great. And if you can cross promote, get on other people's podcasts, that's huge. If you can get an interview in any sort of media, like if maybe like Motif Magazine will like do an interview with you and get it on a local level, and then think about who's listening to my podcast, where do they hang out, maybe I can get like an ad there, or maybe it's like this bar, like maybe I could do a live podcast at this bar, and that's like instead of Quizzo one night, and that would be great. Just a lot of, I think we're working on very local levels, and the budgets are pretty slim, and we want to put them into making quality content. So making an advertising budget, but I will say Google is great too if you know how to do like any sort of like SEO, Google AdWords, Facebook ads. Like it does go a long way to reach more people. I'm not an expert at that, but there are people who are, and it's easy to learn. And if you can invest like $20, you can get maybe an event publicized for your podcast. And I think just like individual branding is good too. So if you have really like if you have a good title and you have a good log line and graphic design, a logo, and a good theme, and like it becomes this unique thing that people can identify, that helps too.
I think also if in your podcast you're interviewing people or featuring other people in your podcast, when it's done and you release it, say to them like, can you distribute this to your contacts?
Yeah.
I think that's been helpful for like the Portuguese comedian one that we played. Like they do most of their promotion of themselves through social media, so they have like 80,000 Instagram followers. So we're like, can you please post it on your on your social media? I think that helped get that out. We've interviewed like academics for certain stories, and we said like just send them around to your circle, because they know other people who are interested in that topic too. So even just and then if anyone says like, oh, I really like the episode, say like, can you share it with on your social media or email around to people?
Yeah.
Just try to get the word of mouth going.
Yeah.
To people who are interested in it too, who are gonna actually listen.
Yeah, and so like if you are like just one other like anecdotal example, I interviewed this guy for one of the second to last episode we did, and he was an older Armenian gentleman. He emailed it to like 300 people because he was just so proud of it, of like being on it, and then he was forwarding me all their responses. So if you can find people like that who like love responding to things.
I think James said that SoundCloud picked up that like 300 people from Armenia like listened to it.
It was because he
We're gonna be touring Armenia
Yeah.
in a couple of months. Yeah, we're big in Armenia.
Big in Armenia. Yeah. That's great.
So, for the episode where you had the Portuguese comedians, what types of questions were you asking them for that story when you interviewed them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I usually when I go into those interviews, I think like I gotta get the chronology so that I know like what the story is, beginning, middle to end, and then I try to ask questions that are gonna get them to give me like anecdotes or stories. So they say like, oh, because people don't always go into an anecdote. They might just say like, oh, it was really hard. Like you got people just make fun of you all the time, for being Portuguese, and then leave it at that. So you guys say like, well, can you give me an example? Like, what's an example? Like, what's something really stand out to you? I kind of ask questions like that to like kind of get the anecdotes out of people. So that's how I got the one about the kid pushing him. Trying to think of the other one where. So then the other guy talking about how it was all like, kind of old traditional music. I think I asked something like, well, if you didn't see yourself in broader culture, like what was it? What kind of Portuguese stuff were you familiar with? And then he said that. And then some questions, like you ask a question thinking maybe you'll use it like for something else, but then their answer as you're going through and writing your story, you think like, hey, that one thing they said when I asked them about something totally different than what I'm getting at here, that would work here. So like I think I asked one question like, what's kind of like a joke you did on your family that got you in trouble? And one of the guys said like, I used to wear my grandma's dentures. And impersonate her. So like I had asked him like, you know, maybe I'd have something in there about him getting in trouble, because they all talked about their parents like, you know, harshly punishing them. So I thought like maybe that would be something, but then that didn't come up. So I used it in a part where we were just saying that like they were funny guys who liked to do funny stuff, you know, and then that was just kind of like an example.
And that was kind of like, I will say they're great interviewees because
Yeah.
they're comedians.
Oh,
So they know a punchline.
They
know
know
their
what's
timing.
funny.
Yeah,
They know what nicknames are funny. They know what's gonna work. But the last episode we put out with Louise, like that was
Right.
like pulling teeth to get like a good story. And you will find people who are like have amazing stories but are so bad at telling them.
And you have to do a lot of editing.
Yeah.
A lot of editing and like pointing out like, well, you just said this, like, didn't that do something? Like, didn't you do that make you cry? You know, like.
Yeah.
They need it, yeah.
Sometimes really simple questions, like you'll write your questions ahead of time, but like Alex was saying, you have to have your like instincts up. You've
Yeah.
got like the chronology that you want to follow, but you got to be constantly like listening to like, okay, like that is a good story, or oh, we're gonna go down this rabbit hole because I think that's the most interesting thing that's here. And sometimes the simplest questions like, how are you feeling at this point? Like as this is happening, like how are you feeling? Or what happened next? Like that's a good question to ask, like what happened next? Or can you take me to the moment that this happened? You know, and then the closer you can get to an actual time and place, the more vivid the sound gets. And Ira Glass likes to say that like the tape that's gold is when the person you're interviewing is impersonating someone else or like telling you an actual dialogue that happened.
Yeah.
Like, so I said this, and she was like, no way, you know, like that's when you're in the moment, you know? So thinking about how the questions you ask can take you to that moment instead of those broad things that people usually say, like, oh, it was tough, I was funny, people picked on me, you know, like dig deeper.
I mean, I think like the best quotes I always get are from follow-up questions. Just saying like, give me an example, and just kind of pushing people to be more specific, because they aren't always.
You can't be nervous to ask them like the most intimate questions. Because if anything, even if you don't use it, it makes them trust you more. They're like, oh, well, I told them this, I can tell them other things too.
And also not to be afraid to interrupt them. I
Yeah.
think we're so polite that we let people like tell a boring story for like an hour.
Yeah.
So you have to be okay. Or interrupting them when like the logic is not working. Like being like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Or call them on their bullshit, like, I don't believe you. Like that doesn't fly. And then that makes them, when you're real with them, they're gonna be real with you. And then that is good tape too. Like that's why you should mic yourself too. Like tape of you being like, no way, and then being like, yes way. Like that gave you no information, technically, like fact-based, but that's the stuff that you need in audio, like things happening.
And follow your own curiosity when you're asking questions. Like if this is interesting to me and I want to know this answer, it's going to be interesting to your audience. Like don't ask the questions that you think you should be asking, you know? Ask the ones that you're actually curious about.
Also, I think a mistake that people often make is they want to show off how much they know when they're interviewing someone. And there's nothing worse than someone who's like done so much research, then they ask this really, really complicated question, and that is signaling to the person that you're interviewing that you want them to talk on that level with you. So then they're talking on a very technical level with you and leaving out all the information that a listener who's new to this needs. So you don't want to be talking to them like you're both industry experts. Even if you happen to be an expert on this, you're asking questions for the listener. So you want to make sure they're explaining it the way you'd explain it to someone the first time.
Yeah, and so one time Alex told me something that was great, which was like, as a journalist or someone interviewing someone, you have to like be the dumb one a lot. Like you have to like play that role and being like, well, what happens when you do this? Like even though you could probably like surmise what happens, you have to be, and you can't be afraid of like making someone uncomfortable because it's not about you. The interview is about what this person has to say.
And playing dumb gets really good tape,
Yeah.
and often
Yeah.
Often
Like,
if-
no, let me clarify.
But, and also, like, often, like, you think you know, but you don't really know. So asking a question like, so tell me, like, walk me through how this works. Like, I can generally kind of figure out, like, what it's like to be a stock trader or something, like, I think. But, like, tell me, like, okay, what do you do in the morning? And then what do you do? And, like, walk me through that. And as they're telling you the story, they might, like, come up with something that you, like, had no idea happens, like, on the floor when they're trading
Right.
stocks or whatever.
Yeah. Or it's like funny that they all like eat sushi at this one place
Yeah.
and like they're all really good friends with the waiters. Like that's funny too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, immigration's a really hot topic,
Yeah.
controversial now. How did news hooks play into, any news hook play into your storytelling? So if there was some national controversy or something on, did that play into your storytelling at all?
Only if it's pertinent to the stories, because we are only focused on personal experiences with immigration. So we want to tell this person's story from, you know, their immigration experience and how they came here and like what it's like for them here. So if something where like with that episode about Muhammad, he's a Syrian refugee. He's not even a refugee. Like getting into like the specifics and legalities of it all. Like he's here on a student visa. He could be a refugee, and we had to talk about Muslim ban. And because when he came, you know, the president had just signed that executive order, so that directly affected him. We took no stance on it. Just said like this had happened, and this was what Muhammad did. Similar with DACA.
Yeah, I would say that like we're not trying to find timely news pegs. Like we're not trying to find like this just happened, now let's find a guy who like is gonna be affected by that. But we'll find someone with a story we wanna tell, and it might be that something that made the news like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
This person, you know, you just heard like the sound bites from officials back then, and this person is an intimate story of someone who went through that experience. So the person Anna was mentioning who like told a very kind of dry story, he was actually, his mother was detained in an immigration raid that happened in New Bedford like I think like 10 or 12 years ago. So that's, I mean, it's so long ago, it's not really a news peg, but it's like, that was a big news event. But it was sort of like people were going to news conferences and getting quotes from officials at that point. This is a story of a guy who was living it like as a kid at the time and what that experience was like for him.
Susan, did you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to make an observation, and that is that one of the best teachers I ever had, and this was in theater and acting, was that if you don't care about the character, there's no point in watching. And that the care that you show towards the people that you interview is what pulls out all the juice. And that God, he said, God is in the details. So it's, you guys are doing that, and it's really exciting to see, you know, how you are basically creating a movie without any visuals. And that storytelling is, it's so ancient. It's how we learn from one another, and it's really beautiful to see, you know, how you're creating all these layers and layers to the story itself, so that we can actually be there. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's a cool point about audio too, that when you said like movie without pictures,
Yeah.
because I mean, with technology today, like anyone can do this. And if like we wanted to make TV episodes where we recreated the story of like Portuguese comedians, we need like, you know, $500,000 budget to do that, you know what I mean?
Right.
But like with audio, you can just tell the story.
In some ways it's richer, because you're
Yeah.
making the listener work.
They're telling us,
Right.
they're visualizing it for themselves.
Yes.
And that's why you sometimes need sound bites that don't have anything to do with the story. Often we put those up top because you're getting the listener to care. So a moment where they, like walking around the campus, looking for a place to interview, it's telling you about them, getting you to care about them. Just a fun, yeah.
When you're out, and interviewing people, say like at Aleppo, what kind of audio equipment do you use?
Specifically, like we have different handheld audio recording devices that, so I use a Zoom H5 and it has two XLR inputs, and so I will have two microphones, handheld microphones, and I'll often hold both of them because even if someone is trustworthy, you shouldn't trust them because they don't know, they're just moving it. So you have to hold it, and then also it avoids like cord sound. Sometimes there's sound that happens when you move a microphone. So, and then it records onto an SD card, and you take the SD card out and you pop it in your computer. So that's all you do. And you have like a little shotgun microphones normally have like a windsock coming, so that helps with any extra sound. But you do have to wear headphones too, and be like, maybe this isn't, like, I wouldn't normally record in a restaurant, but unless you want the sound specifically. So it has to be a reason that you're out. Otherwise, try and go inside, because the wind, the cars, don't want that necessarily. So.
And also, when you're recording at a place that has that noise, and you're doing it on purpose, so you take someone to a place, you want to be recording ambient noise too. Yeah. And what I mean by that is you want to stand in that restaurant for like 30 seconds and just record the sound of the room.
Because that makes it easier for Tom, because if there's something weird where we have to edit it, then you layer that under it, and then it's like a little Band-Aid.
Or if Megan has to do a voiceover, it's like the ambience is still there and you bring it down and then she's talking and then it goes back into the room.
Right, because it would sound really funny if it's like, we're in this busy restaurant, oh, everyone's having fun, and then like silence, and then I'm like, this restaurant is 2018, and then it's a busy restaurant again. That takes you out of the moment so much. Or you might want to bring the ambient in even before you hear the sound. They're like, we decided to go to this restaurant. Clicking sounds.
So how much time do you spend, from start to finish, on any one of these?
Well, we have a pretty fast turn. We have to do this for our jobs, and it's our full-time job, and we have deadlines that we have to meet because it broadcasts on every Wednesday at 6 p.m. So the way that, it takes us probably 2 weeks per person to do each episode, and that includes, recording the interviews and writing the script and editing it and editing it and editing it and then recording it and then doing the technical, the audio editing. But we do have someone that we work with who does that, and then, so 2 weeks, it's a tight 2 weeks.
That's really fast.
It's really fast. It's, so, yeah.
And how long are your pieces?
20, 30 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really good. I have an episode that I worked on for a year, and then the client decided not to use it, and that was a real heartache. That took a long time because, it was going to eventually air on the radio, but that took a long time because it was with the institution, so there were a lot of permissions that we had to work out, and we were following a process as it was taking place. So it started at the beginning where they were thinking about what to do, and then I sat in on meetings and interviewed people all the way through till when they made a decision. So just the recording took from October to February, and then there was the thinking about, okay, now that we know what happened, how are we doing the story arc? And then because it was for a client, not an editor, there were different levels of approval. So it was the person who hired us to do it feeling comfortable with the script and the narration and the final mix. And then he played it for his colleagues, and then they had to feel comfortable with how they were portrayed. So then that created more edits. And then we played it for the final administration, and they said, that makes us look bad, you can never air it.
I hope you got paid anyway.
We did get paid anyway, but it was still a heartache. So it's really situational. The pieces that we do for the Public's radio that air once a week, it's called Possibly, and they're only 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So those pieces are very quick, and I actually work with students, so they do most of the work. They write the scripts, they do the interviews, and I just edit the scripts. And then the Stephen Porter is the professor, so he checks the facts. And so that is a really quick turnaround. I mean, you know, it takes maybe, they write the script in like maybe a week, I edit it, and then we get in the studio, record it, and fix stuff. So it really depends on what you're trying to do.
A question about the format of the shows you guys do or have done. I'm just starting a podcast, hopefully, with 3 other people, and we're kind of trying to decide the way we want the format to go. How bad would it be to switch between like a few different ones depending on the show? Like, is that normal, or is it like kind of a good trademark for your show to always do it the same kind of general way, or is that?
I think you can do it however you want. One podcast I really like is Two Dope Queens, and they just do whatever they want. It's either like they're in a studio and they're just talking, or they had a whole 2 seasons that were live on HBO that were just so, and it works because they're very funny. So like, as long as your content is good, the format doesn't really matter. People will listen to it if they like it, and if it's well thought out, well written, or just, you know, well edited. You know, like audio, honestly, like high audio quality is the biggest thing.
Really.
Just make sure that it's like consistently well recorded, and nothing is hard to listen to. The music isn't way too loud. You know, just stuff like that.
I think if it's on the same, like, theme or idea, like the same, like if 1 week it's a sports show and the next week it's a cooking show, I think that's a problem. But like if it's still like obviously like this is the same show, to have it be like a narrative story 1 week and then more interview based the next week is fine. Like I think like Radio Lab does that from time to time. Like that show, it's a public radio show. That's like a good example where they switch up the format a little bit. We've talked about doing that too with ours, like different weeks. Yeah.
It just takes time to figure it out, you know, like negotiating with your other people, like, okay, but this week we're gonna change it up and do this, like that might be, you might be spending valuable time, you could be making a really good thing that was the same format. The reason why you stick with the format is because it's a format, like it's easier, but if you wanna switch it up, it just takes probably some more thought.
I would also say, what I tell most of my clients is that the first episode is going to be bad.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you're just figuring it out. It's like the first pancake, you don't know if the pan's hot enough yet, or what the consistency is. So don't worry about the first one being perfect or just the right format. And maybe set the bar low at first. So just be like, let's make sure we're using good equipment, we have an idea of what we're doing. Don't get too fancy at first, maybe, and then you can work your way up to something that's more highly produced. Just because in the beginning, it's just about doing it, right? Like just the more you do it, the better you're gonna get, and the better you're gonna know like what the show is about. Like Possibly started with these long episodes, and we realized that that was more work than was necessary, and these shorter ones made sense for the students. But it was just in making stuff that we were having those conversations and refining, you know, what is it that we really wanna do? And if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have arrived at where we are. So just do something, and it's okay to change.
You can do one more question maybe, or finish what you're saying.
No, were you trying to say something?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say that with like thinking about like starting a podcast, I would encourage people to like pick a topic or idea that's like somewhat like specific or niche, because I do think like a lot of the podcasts that people start and then they don't, and then they just kind of quit, are ones that are like too broad an idea, or it's just gonna be like people kind of generically talking about anything. Unless you're like a famous person who can get incredible guests, like I don't think that works like long term, but I think if you find something specific that you're really interested in, and that there's gonna be other people out there that are gonna be interested in, I think that's like a good way to go.
How do you guys keep your followers interacted with your audio podcasts? Like I do live, and they interact all the time through the podcast.
Wow.
They ask questions and they interact, and we talk with them on the show. With a scripted version of a podcast, how do you do the same thing and stay with your listeners and followers so they can still be interactive with your what your topic is?
I think that's I think because yours is live, your listeners would probably want something else out of it. Is my first reaction is when people listen to a story about immigration, my nightmare situation is having it be a call-in show. That would be horrible. Yeah, everyone's just I don't ever want to be that mediator between different ideas. And we're talking about, even environmental stuff, probably don't want to hear what people have to say. But if it's, because it's not constructive, it's not fun for anybody, it just becomes negative. So the way that we normally engage with people is through the station, and we have listeners already, and our friends will give us feedback, but it's much more they listen to these longer shows, they're more intense. Topics are generally bigger, and you do have to kind of think about them, and then it's an after the fact kind of engagement. But what you're talking about, I think, is really crucial too in radio and podcasting and all that, and it's it's just different.
And the radio station does have this thing called Harkin, which is basically a way for people to send in questions. So that's one way that's outside of social media where people can be sending questions, and that's how Possibly works. So listeners go onto the form and write us a question which is associated with higher emissions, oat milk or soy milk or almond milk or cow's milk. What kind of milk should I drink if I want to have the least emissions, stuff people are curious about, and so that creates that interaction. But we've been talking with Sally about how we can interact better with our audiences. So
Sally's the news editor at the radio station, and she's a cool, I don't know how you describe it. I don't know, she's great. She's kind of who do I always compare her to? Patti Smith. She's public radio Patti Smith. It's
and Tom and I are working on having a live event for Possibly. So that's a way to
Yeah, I was gonna say, it sounds like your listeners might appreciate that. It was let's all get in a room together. And,
yeah, that would be cool.
Yes, yeah, that's what it pretty much is.
Yeah.
They definitely interact.
But but physically, and that's a way to make money off of your podcast. That's how a lot of podcasters make money. They have these live events where they sell tickets, and all the fans come because they want to see you in person, and it's like a concert, and you're the rock star.
That was going to be my analogy. So my main experience with what you're talking about was when I was a touring musician and artist, and the first 5 years of before we had any exposure or booking agent or anything was just constantly you kind of have to be committed and believe to the point where I was using my personal social media accounts to be I'm really excited about this show, you need to come to the show, if you know me, go there, please, and yeah, what I imagine, the landscape has changed, I feel that was it was gotten a lot more saturated, so I feel it's difficult to get exposure and to feel you're being seen and heard, but what you were saying earlier, in a way, working locally, and Rhode Island is a great place to kind of it's like a petri dish. It's that's how I felt as a band. It's we got something going, and then it was a fully formed thing based on what we were here, and then I was ready to try to bring it elsewhere. But yeah, I don't I think live event would be kind of a cool.
And really, that you can make money. I mean, that's how a lot of podcasters make money. That and Patreon. I don't know if any of you guys have Patreon accounts. That's how people, and merch. A lot of people sell merch.
And then that's free advertising too once they buy it.
Yeah.
Our podcast is relatively new. We've been working on it since January, and I think it's been airing online and on air since July. Yeah. So, and we've been in super production mode, so we haven't had as much time to dedicate towards kind of marketing for it. Like the two of us marketing it. It's been more the station just putting it on its own social media. But I'm really interested in the idea of doing live events. In kind of an atmosphere like this where you just play the episode and then talk about it afterwards. I think that too, if you get 10,000 people on social media click on it and then they only listen to a minute or they don't listen to it at all, like, I'd rather have a small room of like 50 people listen to it, you know, and get something out of it than just a bunch of people click on a link and not play it. Yeah, I think like the live event idea is pretty cool.
Well, let's thank our panel and thanks for your